Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another installment of Pox Populi and Friends. Today, my friends, my guests are going to be Nicholas Jeelvy and Hwitgeard, and we are going to be discussing some of the sacred cows in nationalist right-wing thought, and we're going to be perhaps tipping them over. So let me just say that we will be taking questions throughout this conversation. And of course, at the end as well, we will open it up to questions for sure. And if you have a question that you really want to see answered or hear answered or addressed by my guests or myself, then you know the drill. Send your question to the Pox Populi entropy. The link has just been shared in the chat. Oh, wrong chat, actually. Let me share it in the correct chat. All right, there we go. And it is now also displayed on screen. I'm having some issues today with internet connection. That was actually why there was a bit of a delay starting the stream. My internet just suddenly stopped having a connection, Wi-Fi, I suppose. And I'm still under the weather a bit, so if my voice is a bit stuffy or scratchy, I hope it won't be too bothersome to listen to. My apologies, but these are the sort of things that are out of my control. We are streaming on YouTube and Odyssey. I see we've got some people watching on Odyssey as well, so welcome all. And I see some familiar faces in the YouTube chat as well. Good evening, everyone. So let's get started. I will introduce my guests. First, we have Nicholas Jeelvy. How are you?
I'm doing well. Pox, thanks for having me. Uh, PSA, I'm also under the weather. I think we caught the same bug, but will be doing our utmost for our audience tonight.
Yes, we will soldier on. And Hwitgeard, welcome. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on again. I'm recovering from a recent bug as well, but but also my nose and lungs seem to be full of sawdust from doing woodwork. But other than that, not too bad.
Yeah, we sound like some old soldiers here comparing battle scars and war wounds, but I think we'll be fine. So thank you both for joining me. I'm really looking forward to this. So let me just give a little bit of backstory for the audience. So, um, this is another installment of Pox Populi and Friends. I do consider the two guests with me tonight to be my friends, and as always with friends, you are in contact with them and you're talking to them about things that are of mutual interest. And for some time, we've been talking, the three of us, about certain topics that flare up every now and again um, in our own uh, in our own bubbles, I suppose, in the things that either affect us personally or that we observe, that we see playing out in our daily lives, and then these topics will also become even broader in importance, and we'll observe that other people are now having are addressing these topics as well and talking about them on their channels or having discussions about them, or writing articles, etc. Or even I think, as we might get to later, major films that are nominated for Oscars kind of dovetail nicely into the topics that we've been discussing amongst ourselves privately as friends. And so I figured, you know what? All of this deserves an audience. It deserves to be spoken about publicly in a sort of semi-formal manner. So this might even be a bit of a debate, because I do think we have some slightly differing opinions. But I do think that what we're going to talk about tonight is also useful and practical, and I'm all about the practical. And I think that some of the things we're going to talk about, it's very important to have a clear head on them and to position yourself correctly, and then implement practically choices and lifestyle choices. So one of the things that kicked off my desire to talk about this publicly, one of the things that really dovetailed with the things that Nix, Hwitgeard, and I had been talking about privately as friends, was this post from the Golden One on Telegram. And it was shared all over. You could say it went viral, I suppose. As of today, on Telegram, it has over 20,000 views. And he has a pretty big following. His stuff gets quite a lot of reach anyway. But in comparison to his other posts, usually they get like 5,000 views. So this one has over 20,000 views. So people really responded to this. They shared it. I think there was a lot of positive response to it. And it's not a very long post, so I'll just read it. He said, "I'm tired of seeing all of these trad accounts posting about the masculine urge to quit the degenerate society. First and foremost, there is nothing manly about wanting to quit or escape. Secondly, to think that you can escape society is naive. They will still come for you, even if you live in a cabin out in nowhere. A bit of escapism now and again can be good, gaming in my case, but I do not try to pass it off as a virtue. Again, there is nothing virtuous or manly about not wanting to impose your will on society. Moreover, a trad wife will not want to live on a secluded farm. A woman wants to find herself in a social context with friends and family around. Similarly, a man should want to live in the vicinity of his tribesmen. Do not get me wrong, I much prefer the countryside to the city, and it is always a good idea to be as self-sustainable as possible, but it is of paramount importance to understand that you are still living in a society." And I see the Woodlander has said he's both right and wrong. I was hoping I could. I thought too late of it to invite the Woodlander onto this stream, but I'm glad to see that he's in the chat because I'm sure that he has very good views on this, very nuanced views. And again, going back to practicality, is someone who is practically living out this very question. So anyway, that was something that kind of, really spread throughout our community, and it was something that Nix and Hwitgeard and I were already talking about, and already even kind of debating about as gentlemen. So let's start with this topic. This is the question of I just want to live in a woods. I want to, flee degeneracy and just be left alone to raise a family, in a cabin in the woods or in some farm in the countryside or something. I want to homestead like Devin Stack, like Blackpilled is doing. And this also kind of ties into another thing that we've seen arise lately, which is this idea in the nationalist right that to be an urbanite, to live in the city, is just basically like to be a loser, to be a bugman. How could you possibly live in the city? So, Nix, I'm going to throw it to you first because you also wrote a very good article on countercurrents about this. So, can you share your thoughts on this whole issue of the masculine urge to go homesteading, flee the degenerate city, and also this idea of the weak loser urbanite compared to the trad farmer?
Well, first I gotta say that I too feel the urge to just, I used to feel the urge to go in the woods and never come back, but it's not masculine. I haven't felt it since I was, I guess, 6 years old. And I used to have this dream of just living in the woods without a soul around, just me and my books and maybe okay, I was 6 in 97, so yeah, an internet connection maybe for updates and stuff like that. But it was a childish urge because I was sick of other people. I did not get along really well with other children, so I just wanted to be left alone. I wrote an article for Countercurrents. It's called Altgrid versus Offgrid, and it started when I was really thinking about that term Offgrid. People use it, and I don't think they fully grasp its meaning. When you think off-grid, you think of being completely independent from quote unquote the system, right? And then you realize, well, that's not really possible because you mentioned Devon Stack. Devon Stack, he's out in the desert somewhere, and still he relies on the system. He buys stuff. He's not 100% off grid, and really, there's no need to. And ultimately, there is no point. My central point was that if you are truly off grid, or even 90 or 80% off grid, then basically you would have to be living like Robinson Crusoe. We use, like, in economics, they use Robinson Crusoe as an analogy because Robinson Crusoe cannot benefit from division of labor in any way. And even, if you read the novel itself, survival is a daily chore for Robinson Crusoe every day until he manages to capture and tame Friday, right? The black guy, the native. Then basically they can engage in rudimentary division of labor, and suddenly, his standard of living increases quadruple fold, not just because he has a human being to talk to, but also because they can do. And so a lot of people say, "Oh, well, you gotta build a community, so it's not just you, not just the lone prepper in the woods." But I say to them, "But at that point, you're not really off grid. You have plugged yourself into this grid, this alternative grid." So I say, "Yeah, actually, I can jive with that. I can jive with being alt grid." Now, let's say there is a grid, an alternative grid of nationalist farmers. Wouldn't it be a good idea for me, being a degenerate urbanite city slicker who cannot produce food, to periodically purchase food from the nationalist farmers and then go do my city sleeker thing, because I'm a writer, I make, video content, I'm an ideologue of nationalism, so I developed the nationalist ideology. I try to organize people politically because I'm not just an ideologue, I'm also like a political organizer, a political activist. And that's okay, that's my full-time job, or maybe, I live off something else and do that for the cause. And so if I am plugged into the alt grid, I'm still, somewhat dependent on the system, but I have offloaded a percentage of my dependence on friendly people, right, who are not going to cut me off because of my ideology. So, in a sense, I came to this idea that off grid, that living alone in the woods, really arises out of several places. The first is libertarian ideology, and a lot of us are former libertarians, right? So we still have remnants of that ideology ratting around in our heads. The second place is, I think, romanticism, because we are nationalists, and this is a romantic ideology, so it's natural that we are romantics. And Marcus mentions escapism, so, and it's also escapist. A lot of people may dislike the way modern cities look, and I I agree with that. I can see where they come from, even though I have my own opinions about modern cities, and they're a little bit more nuanced than a blanket condemnation. And I think yeah, that's those are the two. And the third place is, it comes from American conservatism, right? And a lot of us are, first and foremost, formerly American style conservatives. It overlaps with the libertarianism thing. But also, American conservatism, and especially in its MAGA variation, overlaps significantly with this thing of ours, for reasons both, for reasons I'm not going to get into them because they're beyond the scope of this show. And a part of American conservatism and a deal of American MAGA conservatism is this romantic conception of the American homesteader, of basically the right-wing American being an independent farmer slash homesteader, that the American working class is this and that. Now, the reality of who MAGA is, I would say, does not over. It's. I don't think that MAGA is as working class as it tries to present itself.
Can I jump in just a second and read some of the words you wrote in your article? One of my favorite passages from that article, actually. Do you mind?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So because it's right about this very same thing that you're talking about now, and so as you were talking about the the masculine urge to live in the woods or be a homesteader following the footsteps of some mid 1800s frontiersman or something, you write, it is in many ways a counsel of despair, and I suspect that it also comes from a desire of conservative Americans who mostly live in suburbs posing as small towns to describe themselves as hardy country folk, as opposed to the degenerate big city libtards. And I thought that it stings, but I thought it also gets to the truth. I think it is a very accurate description of what you were just saying, how sort of American style conservatism, with all of the trappings and idealism and romanticism that is associated with it, has been superimposed over nationalist right wing thought. And so now we've got to this point where we're memeing about homesteading, and we are memeing about the degenerate urbanite. So yeah, I thought that was a pretty good description and a pretty good line from your article.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I didn't think of it in spoken because it is very harsh, but it is unfortunately that it's one thing to write it out and then send it for publication. It's quite another thing to say it, I guess. But I came to this conclusion that I was really set down this rabbit hole. The conclusion came later by a friend who basically pointed out that a lot of this was back in 2020 and 2019. A friend who pointed out that a lot of the people who are MAGA, right, who are Donald Trump supporters, they call themselves working class, but they are more accurately described as a lower middle class. And this, I don't say it to criticize them. Lower middle class, I love the lower middle class. If it weren't for the lower middle class, I would have been a pedestrian right now. As it happens, a lower middle class small businessman fixed my car, and now I can drive again. But they're not working class. They control their own means of production many times. They're professionals. They are plumbers. They are mechanics. They are HVAC specialists. They do all of these essential labor to keep society running. And because their work is somewhat more physical than that of other professionals, such as doctors, lawyers, accountants, larger business people, right? So basically, what you're seeing, what I was trying to get at is the plumber who lives in a house in the suburbs calls himself working class because he works with his hands. He's a plumber, and calls himself rural because he does not work in a city. I mean, doesn't live in a city. He lives in a suburb, but he's not exactly rural. Like, he's not exactly a farmer. And he contrasts himself with the lawyer who makes, who is maybe one income bracket higher than him, has a college degree as opposed to a vocational degree like a plumber, and works with his brain, right? And is typically lives in the city and is liberal. However, in economic, historical, psychological terms, really, the difference between this lower middle class plumber and the upper middle class lawyer is very small, especially when you compare them both to a farmer who is rural and, you know, class wise. I mean, farmers, I don't think fit well into a like a traditional class structure. In and, and they're both very different from someone who is very wealthy from finance or owns a large corporation, or from being part of the managerial class of large corporations, right? And and so I found it amusing, really, that the plumber, who is himself a professional, right, like the lawyer, thinks himself, oh, I'm superior to this guy because I went to vocational school and fixed people's toilets, you know, as a specialized skill, as opposed to him who went to law school and he fixes people's legal uh, problems as a specialized skill. I
Mhm.
say this as someone who is a lawyer, and I've met quite a lot of plumbers in my time, and I really did not find a lot of difference between myself and the plumber, even though the plumbers always treated me with a mixture of reverence and resentment because of what they perceived was as like a massive status difference. But I really did not see a difference between myself and them.
And it's a useful, like I said, I think there's practical things to talk about, because we have now been seeing for quite some time in not just the online right, the dissident right, nationalist communities, but major conservative pundits in the mainstream have been saying this as well, that don't go to university, get a go study a trade, study a vocation. You're better off becoming an electrician or a plumber. And there is some merit to that. There is some logic to that. It is true that a lot of university educations these days are very expensive and not quite worth it. And a lot of things that you can graduate in, that you can major in, are pretty useless. Meanwhile, if you want to have steady employment, maybe even become self-employed, a vocational training is a good idea. But then if it swings too far in that direction, then we are abandoning a lot of the terrain, a lot of the battlefield, and especially in a time when lawfare is so important. To not have any lawyers on our side, it would be suicide. Um, so, Hwitgeard, I'm going to throw it to you. What do you make of this urbanite versus homesteader distinction? What do you make of this masculine urge to live in the woods or in the desert or somewhere like that? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, that's quite a long gap since we started after Nick's began his talk. So there's quite a lot to respond to and bounce back from. But returning back to Marcus's original points that he made, I think that he has a very ahistorical view of what cities are like. Of I don't think it's possible to go completely off grid, because you need to have a new society. The whole point of going away from our current system is to start a new system in which you can be independent. And when you have these pioneers like those who founded America, who can form new colonies and new civilizations, their whole point isn't to be some isolated hermit living in the middle of the woods away from no one. Their whole point was to found a new community. So you have to have specialist skills, specialist jobs, and all those jobs and all those skills are very much practical ones. They can't be essentially bullshit jobs which have no real basis. They have to be practical, which can form the backbone of a society. But I think that his view of what a city is compared to the modern one is there's quite a qualitative difference there. I think that the Roman herbs or the medieval burr of the past is probably a lot closer to the ideal city than what we have
Hmm.
now. So
Hmm.
when people talk about trying to leave the cities, it what we have now is very much it's new, it's ahistorical, it's never been at any point in time have we ever had cities like we have now. So I think that our conception of what's best for people living in cities. When Marcus was talking about how women prefer to live in a much more sociable environment and in cities than just being isolated on a farm. And I'd agree with his points, but I think that his general framing is that he's making it a one or the other, where it's either being a hermit living in complete solitude or living in a city. And I think that the city that he has in mind, especially living in Sweden, is probably not going to be comparable to somewhere like New York City, for example. And yeah, I think it's more important to have that contextual framing into what sort of city, what sort of environment we're looking at, what sort of what qualifies a urban environment compared to suburban or compared to rural. And I agree with Nick's main article. I think it's more important rather than going off grid and living as a hermit, which sounds like a great idea when you're younger, especially when you aren't very social like I am, and you are quite a bit of a hermit.
I was
But
going to say it sounds better as I'm getting older, actually.
yeah, exactly. But at the same time, there's a sense of duty that you have to be around people. You can't just go, I don't like being around people, therefore I'm going to just be in complete isolation. At some point, you have to realize that you have a duty towards other people, and other people have a duty towards you. And sometimes that can be quite one-sided because you feel that you're giving a lot for people who aren't giving back to you, and that can leave you feeling quite defeatist. So it's no wonder that a lot of people just want to run off and live in the woods in complete isolation because they aren't getting that cooperative feedback. And the more diverse, the more industrialized, and of course the more multicultural a place becomes, the less that you can get that cooperation and feedback with people, and the more that just running away to the woods feels more beneficial. But the whole point of founding a, a new off-grid, or in this case, all-grid society, is that you're looking to form a new community. You're looking to have less dependency, less dependent less dependency on the government and much more dependency on your local community. So you're going to start forming relationships with your local builders, with your local butchers, and start buying from that local community. So I think that I think we need to have a good perspective onto what we're actually looking for, and also the framework of what qualifies urban compared to rural, because I don't think that it's going to be one or the other. I think that we're looking for an urban society to move to, but on a much smaller scale than what we're living in.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it's something that has been, very well said by Frode Midjord, is the concept of nationalist Narnia, and I think you're kind of alluding to it a bit there. A lot of people in our community, it's not so much that they don't like the idea, or they don't like just full stop living in an urban environment, and so they want to go off into the woods. It's also because there's a bit of nationalist Narnia going on, and they think that, well, what is it really about living in the city that they don't like? It's the multiculturalism, it's the daily grind, it's the public transport, it's the noise, it's the increased number of strangers, right? Foreigners, people who are not of their kin, that are just speaking totally different languages, look totally different, dress in different ways, or have behaviors that are off-putting and difficult to understand. And so they feel alienated in their own environment, which is obviously a very awkward and demoralizing sensation to feel. You don't want to feel alienated in the place where you're already from. And so the fantasies arise of like, you know what, I just want to go somewhere else, somewhere with peace and quiet, somewhere with beauty, somewhere where I can just be away from these aggressive, noisy people. And I fully understand it. It's a normal reaction, I think. I've been there. I've done that at occasions in my life. But the city can also be beautiful, and the city can also be spiritually uplifting. I think anyone who has spent a moment in, a Mediterranean, an Italian piazza at twilight, or anyone who has walked down the narrow cobblestone streets of an old medieval town, or anyone who enjoys the spiritual uh, spark that is provided by seeing great art in a museum or going to see a music concert. These are things that take place in cities, and they can also be uplifting and in very important ways. Beautiful architecture. I think it is true that beauty will save the world, and there can be beauty in a city. So I think you're right about it having to be a question of a qualitative framework and knowing what you want and why you're doing it. Let me get to a response as well that I wanted to read. This is from another person with golden in his stage name, his nom de guerre, as it were. So the Golden Age man responded to the Golden One by saying, Sweden was the only Western country in the world, I believe, that did not have lockdowns or mask mandates. I suspect Marcus's opinion might be different if he had lived in Australia or Germany or somewhere that went full draconian police state. The lockdowns and mask mandates were the huge reveal that showed me the extreme power that the technocrats have over the minds of the people. There is no fight to win if the majority of the people are entirely captured by insanity and they treat you as the enemy. The situation is much more desperate than we had previously considered. I've said it before and I'll say it again. You cannot fight an enemy you are dependent on. I don't know what the situation is in Sweden, but in the USA, the enemy controls the food supply, the electricity, the internet, and the water. They can turn it all off if you become a problem. If you want to fight this, you must fight from a position of strength, and that looks something like what Orania is doing, or what Thomas Sowell is doing and planning to do in Australia. There is no reason at all to stay in a big multicultural US city and let your daughters be assaulted by feral blacks while you are taxed out the eyeball for your troubles, and you are completely reliant on the city infrastructure to feed your family. There is no strength in that. It's foolishness. So a pretty strongly worded response. I think he makes some good points there about the COVID situation, the past few years that we've all been living through. I think, Neil Oliver actually just made another one of his lengthy sort of internet speeches where he even talked about this, and he's an intelligent guy, but even he has, had the veil pulled over his eyes, and he's realized just how dystopian the situation is, and how it seems like everywhere, certainly in the West, if you want to use that term, everywhere in Europe, in the United States, Canada, Australia, but many other countries as well around the world, it seems like all of our governments just actively hate us. They do not have our best interests at heart. They're not looking out for our good. And so in the wake of all this, in the wake of what we lived through and what we can expect to live through again now that the precedent has been set, I think a lot of people have had this groundswell of a desire to get out of anywhere, any place where your freedom and your access to food, water, oxygen, going out when you want to go out, seeing your family when you want to see your family, leaving any place where that can be restricted um, at the whim of government officials, nanny state officials, globalist technocrats, whatever you want to call them, who don't like you. And as we've seen from these lockdown files, who are laughing at you and talking about scaring the pants off you. So I totally get why people want to do this, which is why I think it's necessary to have these conversations and talk about the pros and cons and the realistic expectations we can have. Next, what do you think about the influence that the past few years has had on our perception of this matter?
Well, first of all, I wanna address the elephant in the living room, the 300-pound gorilla. We are on YouTube, so I will word this diplomatically. A lot of people, when they say they don't want to live in the city, that what they mean is they don't want to live near the diversity, and that's really about 90% of the revulsion people feel towards a city, right, in the West. Because I see someone, mentioning Budapest in the comments, and I loved being in Budapest. When I was in Budapest, I spent 2 months in that city. Absolutely beautiful, breathtaking place. I've had numerous moments of genuinely rapturous feeling in Budapest because it's just such a breathtaking place. And when I was in Paris, I could have had those. But the problem was I was always looking over my shoulder. A friend of mine, who was also with me in Paris, he was mugged on the metro. We were attacked by on the next stop. We were attacked by another black person, like a Afro French person, who just had a chimp out, and so it was a very unpleasant experience. But I'm thinking, had there been no blacks and Arabs in Paris, I would have probably enjoyed it more than Budapest, right? So let's get that out of the way. Now, as for Golden Age man saying we should be dependent on this and independent on that, I got two words for you: agricultural subsidies. Uh, I think people underestimate the degree to which the system controls rural communities, controls farmers, and controls basically the countryside to a much greater extent than the city, you could say. Um, there is like an old sentence, like an old truism from British criminal culture, that it's far easier to evade the authorities in London than it is to evade them anywhere else in the United Kingdom. The reason is basically you get these small towns, you get the countryside, and it's far easier to monitor these large swathes of land with fewer people present. And in London, you can just lose yourself in the multitude. You can just disappear in the endless warrens, um, and evade the authorities. I Back when I was, running for office, organizing politically here in Macedonia, I asked one party leader. Like we were an independent political movement, but we temporarily made an alliance with an established political party, which was nationalist, or nationalist enough to stand for office. And people from our movement were like, you know what? Let's campaign bomb. Let's like concentrate all of our resources on a couple of small rural municipalities and win local power there, use it to build a power base out. And he said, no, that's not going to work. The reason is because the system, the enemy, the two major parties have such a tight control on rural communities through agricultural subsidies. Essentially, they can use these to blackmail these communities, which depend on agricultural subsidies to survive. And basically, there is no free election in the countryside. the two major parties, they have lists of people, and they know which way you voted, and this will inform their decision making when it comes when the time comes to renew agricultural subsidies. Where am I going with all of this? Someone mentioned the lockdowns. Well, during the lockdowns, I was not allowed to enter supermarkets. I was not allowed to shop at supermarkets or various places. So I basically turned to the farmers market, to smaller shops. Whereas in a smaller city, I would have probably been limited to the supermarket, right? And because a smaller city, because it's a smaller market, yeah, the winner takes all effects are much larger. And the smaller a community is, the fewer choke points, the more the fewer the fewer. It's far easier for the system to grab a smaller community by a key asset, economic or otherwise, and use it to control. Like I said, I don't know where I said it. I said it somewhere, but I think Blackpill mentioned it in one of his streams. Like, you don't want to become, you go out to the countryside, you become a farmer, and you think you've become independent, so you laugh at the urbanite who buys his food at the supermarket, but you are even more dependent now on the system because you depend on the feed and seed store. The guy who lives in the city, he can walk out of the supermarket, he can maybe drive out to a farmer's market, deal directly with the farm, or maybe buy in smaller stores, right? Or go to a different supermarket. But since in your locality there's probably just one feed and seed store, if the enemy controls it, and they probably do, and they decide to cut you off, you're fucked as a farmer. And this is I guess my central point. Do not assume that just because you're in the countryside and because you are quote unquote producing your own food, that the system cannot cut you off. In fact, they might find it easier. And here I brought up the example of essentially, and Hwitgeard can actually back me up on this because it's well documented historical fact, I think, that in Anglo-Saxon England, the incomparably less evil and less centralized government formed by the Anglo-Saxon feudal elite successfully controlled firewood, right? So you had a quote on how many trees you could fell, not just firewood, but wood for timber as well, construction wood. And it's absurd to think that if the Anglo-Saxon lords could control wood, that our government could not exercise a similar degree of control over far more important resources than that. And that is that. And I'm not saying, like, a lot of people may misunderstand this. Like, don't go out into the countryside and become a farmer. I wish there were a lot more nationalist farmer. I think the biggest problem we have with regard to farming is that so many of them are civic nationalists, or at best, they benefit from migrant labor. They are dependent on agricultural subsidies. But you got to understand that just because you've moved out to the countryside and you're growing your own food does not mean you're independent of the system. In some ways, you may be more dependent on the system now, right? If you have an objection to cities because they're full of diversity, I agree. Yeah, you were right to move out. If you have other objections, like an aesthetic objection to cities, I do not agree with you, but I understand your decision because you don't have to have the same aesthetic tastes as I do. But do not expect to be quote unquote independent of the system. And also, you should expect, right? I don't know what's it like in the West, but like I said, your ultimate goal is to construct an alt-grid. You don't want to live like a hermit in the woods. No offense to the woodlander, but you want to develop a community of like-minded people and actually construct a power base. This may be more difficult in the country. What, you think you're the only person living there? No, there are people already living there. They already have communities, power-based communities, right? You remember Killdozer, right?
The name is sounds
Marvin
familiar.
Heremeier. Marvin Heremeier, the guy who built the Killdozer and basically chimped out all over his town. Well,
Hmm.
if you look into his story, he lived in this small rural town. He was pretty independent, Air Force veteran, had his own muffler shop, and the local government destroyed his business for incredibly petty reasons
Hmm.
because he pissed off the local power elites, like some guy who owned a concrete plant and had corrupt influence over the mayor and over the city government, basically walled out his workshop from the road, from the sewer connection, yada, yada, yada. And they bullied this guy and they expected him to fold. Well, he didn't. He built the killdozer and went on a rampage. But if you think that you are safe from the system's machinations in the countryside, Marvin Heremeier thought he had it made, thought he was independent, and then the corrupt local government just fucked up his existence somewhat horribly.
Yeah.
And that's
Well, that's why we're having this conversation,
yeah.
because memes are powerful, and especially the more often they are repeated and the more often they are shared. And we are having this meme of, if you're living in a city, you're a dependent bugman urbanite, and you should leave the city. And I think that meme is very powerful, and I think it's also powerful because it clearly connects with our natural instincts and things that we naturally want, like peace and a connection with nature and beauty. And I think that distinction between off-grid and alt-grid too, it's very important. We should be memeing more about not just random individuals going off into the countryside or off into the woods or the desert or the mountains, but communities doing it and forming an alt-grid so that we are not so easily squeezed or oppressed by even the local town council of the countryside or something. Um, and something that I wrote, just a brief summary, I guess, of your article, Nix, was I wrote off-grid living for health reasons. For example, you want to eat natural produce that hasn't been tainted by industrial farming practices. For lifestyle reasons, for example, you don't like city life, or for forming a bit of independence and self sufficiency, for example, not having a boss and working at a company that can replace you, not depending on supermarkets or things like that. Those are all reasons that I think are completely valid for wanting to live in the countryside, wanting to start a homestead, wanting to, keep the family farm, or go off and buy a rundown cottage, fix it up, turn it into something productive for yourself and your family. I, as someone who cares a lot about nutrition and health, and is pretty, I try and keep abreast of what's going on with food practices and what is being put in our food. I can totally understand, and I totally agree with people who say that um, one of the great reasons to live, quote unquote, off grid or in the woods or whatever, is that you can have a bit more control, at least over knowing what you're eating. And the quality is much better. I've spoken with Tier about this as well, the guy who's working and living on a farm in Switzerland. And then I wrote, off grid living is not for everyone, though. And I spoke about this in my long video from a couple years ago called Tradophilia, where I talk about how a lot of this is a mental state of it's a question of a state of mind. This whole city slickers versus country folk. If you are a city slicker and you're a bit fed up with where you're at in an urban environment, maybe it's not the best idea that you go off and start a homestead, because you might not have the mentality for it. Not let alone the skills, the mentality. It's a very different place. And I have, lived in both environments over the course of my life, and I enjoy one more than the other. But when I lived in when I lived and worked on farms truly in the middle of nowhere, for me, it wasn't a problem because I'm mentally, I'm okay with that. I like that. I like working with animals. I like being around animals. I don't mind being in the middle of nowhere. I don't mind getting dirty.
Yeah, just an aside, like I have a friend, he's recently gone to college in a smaller town, in like a college town.
Mhm,
We live in a big city here. I live in Skopje, which is the capital of Macedonia. Population probably 1 million. We're not allowed
mhm.
to have an official census because, reason reasons. And one thing he mentioned is that he has trouble falling asleep because this small college town, population 40,000, does not have enough traffic noise.
Mm.
It creeps him
Yeah,
out.
he likes the sleep. He likes to fall asleep to the sound of
Right.
traffic.
Right. There is
Yeah.
not enough background noise for him to fall asleep. He feels like any minute something will emerge out of the darkness. Keep in mind,
And this is why there's the
this is a
memes. This
town
is
of
why there are the memes of
40,000
the
people.
bugmen,
Right.
right? We've seen the memes of the bugmen. We've seen the people, the screenshots of tweets from these, shitlib, urbanites on Twitter who have anxiety attacks at just the very thought of being, you know, in the woods or in the countryside or in the mountains with no city infrastructure or anything like that. They can't handle it and they start literally shaking because they don't have the mentality. They don't have what it takes. So yeah, it's definitely an important factor. And then another thing that's important is that I think that the the masculine urge to off-grid live or things like that, it's not a path for political success. It could be a path for personal success, for personal well-being, for personal development. It could change your life in very positive ways. It could You could become a healthier person. Also, there are all sorts of positives, but a political success, I don't think, is one of them. And it's not the path for cultural works. And this was something that you wrote about too, Nix. Like if you are always having to milk cows or do DIY or uh, till the earth or harvest the fruit and veg or cut down a cornfield that is no longer necessary and you want to change it. I remember doing that was quite a few days of intense labor, entire cornfield. Um, right. So if you're doing that sort of thing, you're not making any cultural effort. And we are in a culture that has lost or has.
Uh, Pox, you're breaking up something fierce, mate.
Yeah, it sounds like his internet's going. Is he still there?
I think he is. I guess it's up to us to fill the dead air. I
Well, I might as well have my response ready.
Yeah. And then I think we'll go on to the next topic.
Okay. Well, I've got to be
Yeah, go
the
on.
person in disagreement here. I I can see many of Nix's points, but it does mainly seem to boil down to bad things can happen in the countryside as well, so you may as well not do it. I know that's just a bit of a oversimplification, but being self-sufficient is very much a sort of continuum. You aren't like a suddenly off-grid or self-sufficient um, compared to not being so the previous day. It's a continual process of weeding yourself off the system and being a lot more independent and in control of it. And yes, you are right about the particular choke points of if you have a much smaller society, then that's easy to have to be controlled if that one particular choke point can be controlled. But say that that small community is part of a collective community. It's not just you move over to a small town or village, and you're just living out your days there, but you actually take an active engagement in the community that you're in. The people that you're with share your politics as well, share a similar worldview to you, and they also have a bit of a stake in their community politically as well. That means that if everyone becomes a vanguard of their own particular choke points, that makes the center, the core of our community, less penetrable. It means that if all the exits can be blocked by a community where everyone serves a collective interest in that community, then it that's blocking off multiple choke points rather than just the one. But I think also the whole point is that I know that the issue here is that by going off grid or alt grid in this case, you're essentially not engaging with the system because you're essentially escaping from it or fleeing from it, and that by not engaging with it, by getting away from the system, you're unable to fight against it. But I think the whole power of the current system means that by engaging in it, you become part of it, and that by retreating from it, well, not so retreating, but by stepping out from it and having a lot more control um, over your resources and your community, you take the power away from that system to be able to essentially the power of the current system is the fact that people buy into it, that they take part in it, and that by not taking part in it, you deprive it of power. You deprive it of your labour, of your contributions to it, and by shaping a much more independent community, you can essentially take it away from the current system and push that into your own. I think that seems to be the point here, that it's less about retreating from the main system and running away and retreating as a independent individual, but still belonging to a wider collective. But that collective has to step aside from the main system and become its own new system. It needs to put its power, put its work into that new system, and that way it's less able to be controlled by the main one. However, I do see a lot of Nix's points as well. They are very black pilling, especially the amount of phosphates and nutrients that our farming depends on. We need to massively import all of that, especially from China as well, in order to be able to make our own, or to fertilize our own soil, because the topsoil has just been depleted and lacks any natural nutrition. So essentially, we become dependent on a foreign country just to provide the nutrition for our own soil in order to grow our own food. So it kind of pokes more and more holes in that issue of dependence. But I think that the issue still stands here of the less power that you give the system, the less it's able to control you and have its own sense of power. It's like its power doesn't depend on itself; it depends on those who contribute and buy into it.
Sure. Yeah, very well said. And I would just say we're not trying to black pill or even counter signal or anything like that. It's always a bit annoying that we have to make those disclaimers. We're having this conversation because I think we're all a bit oversaturated with this topic, and I think we all thought that it's time to provide some clarity and just actually, instead of sharing memes about this, or just having sort of nationalist Narnia fantasies, why don't we actually talk about what this is really like in real life, and what are the pros and cons, and what is what does it actually mean to be independent of the system? What is that like? And what are some qualitative parameters that we can apply to this, rather than just memeing about it all the time? And I think that was also the fountain of Golden One's frustration that you could see in his post. I mean, he begins by saying, "I'm sick of it, right? I'm sick of seeing these posts about the masculine urge to live in the woods or something, or escape society, rather."
Yeah, I mean, my opposition to it isn't because I don't want to see a network of nationalist rural communities spring up all over every white country. I am the agrarian populism guy on countercurrents. I'm saying we should probably ditch the mid-century Italian German ideology because it depends on having a massive industrial proletariat, which we no longer have. We would actually have far more payoff trying to red pill white farmers. Now, what my point has always been, moving to the country and becoming a farmer is not a magic pill which will solve all your problems. It's actually, in many ways, it is more difficult than basically cultural and political and legal work we should do in the cities. In fact, I would say that, yeah, go out. If you move out to the country and become somewhat independent of the system and successfully start a commercial farm, this is obviously going to be good for you. But eventually, this is probably going to happen. Someone's going to ask why all of your farmhands are white, and you better hire white farmhands. Don't be like the other farmhands and hire just immigrant labor. Don't be like the other farmers. That's another thing, you're going to run into. You're going to find that the countryside, if you're in America, for example, a lot of the farm labor is Mexican. And it's
and the
not
conversation I had
competitive
with
to hire white people, right? And
it
if
depends
you
on the country too. Some of the things too that just came to mind. The conversation I had with Gerard Murphy when I was conversing with him about the Ireland situation, he mentioned something that I thought was very interesting. That if you are looking for fellow travelers with nationalist sentiment, in Irish cities on the east coast of Ireland, like in Dublin, that's where it's all really kicking off. But it's in the Irish countryside. It's in the Irish countryside, and in the small towns and in the west coast, where actually they're not really they're either not very switched on about this, or they're kind of compliant with it all. And so if you were to go into a small Irish village in the sparsely populated west coast of Ireland, or the homestead in the Irish countryside, and then try and integrate with a community there, you might find yourself just as much the odd man out as you were in the place that you wanted to flee. So it's very interesting how these social ecosystems can manifest themselves.
Yeah, it's, I guess, something that people don't want to face, a reality people don't want to face, that uh, modern white nationalism is a deeply urban movement, that people who think like us don't really live in villages. I mean, even small towns, it's difficult to find someone like us.
We reach the view we have because of living in cities, because of being constantly exposed to diversity every single day, and it's that personal experience which makes those living in urban environments much more aware and experienced, at the very reason that they became white nationalists in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So we kind of already touched on the other issue, which is how the right is putting manual labor and being, hardworking, honest man, salt of the earth, type of thing, that sort of romanticism, and losing a bit, or quite a lot actually, of culture in the process, and or even not just culture, but also other important fields of work like lawfare, like legal things. Do you guys have anything more to add about that? Do you want to flesh that out a bit more? This thing of the trad, manual labor right wing man who is, perhaps covered in sawdust or something, and he wears blue jeans, yet he has no say in the culture war. He has no legal recourses to defend himself. He has no political representation, really, because it's the non-manual labor people with all of this free time to be activists and have money behind them, to be pushing their agendas that are actually imposing themselves on society.
I think this is the necessity of having a general hierarchical structure of recognizing the importance of different people with different roles within the nationalist movement as a whole. Everyone can't be all on one side. Everyone can't all be rural farmers. They can't all be the suburban labourers. You do need to have different people who are all contributing different things to it. Even those who have a lot of free time on their hands to do activism, even they serve a part in the greater whole. So I think that rather than trying to ask people, why aren't you more like this, it's more important to find what their place is within the grand whole structure of things.
Nix?
Well, once again, I think I am the originator of the discussion here. And I wrote an article like 100 years ago, in May 2019. It's called "Work Stinks." It's very pithy, right? And basically it reflects my own attitude towards labor. I'm not a guy who enjoys working. I can tell you that. But I think the introduction to that article is going to serve as my position on the child labor notion. So I wrote this in 2019. There are several boomer tier jokes going around on the internet, and most of them predated, about voter turnout at different times of day in the United States. Something about Democrats getting an early lead, but then losing it when Republicans get off from work and vote. It's supposed to be a dig at the Democrats for being unemployed, welfare leeches, or working for the government. And it's a clever dig if you value working, which I suppose a part of the population should. But here at Countercurrents, we value honesty and truth, no matter how ugly, and we take a massive sledgehammer to pretty lies, no matter how useful. The fact of the matter is that work stinks. It's boring and not something that brings pride or joy to a great man. The boomer jokes in question are supposed to mock the Democrats for working, but they actually signal that being Republican is low class because, as the bankrupt and displaced Comte de Frou from Blackadder said to the Priest Regent's butler, I want other people to earn money and give it to me, just like in France, just like in the good old days. So essentially, what we have here is, if you work for a living, it marks you out as the laboring peasant class. Whereas people who don't work for a living, whom you mock as having like an invented job, like he's a public relations manager for something or other, he has this make work job, this invented job, because he is your master. And liberals hold these jobs because they are the ruling class of the West, and because they have incomes regardless of the effort they put into these jobs. Like they could do them like no-show jobs, like in The Sopranos, right? This frees them up to actually concern themselves with the business of governing, of being, the ruling class, of ruling, of developing the methodologies of rule. So they engage in culture creation and control, and they rule us through the culture that they create the news, they decide what is news, and they can do all of this because they have the time to do it. They have the time to do it because they are freed from labor. And that's really something that I guess should sink into people. If you can imagine, you're transported back to medieval times, and it's like the peasant making fun of the Lord. Ha ha! You don't till in the fields. You spend all day uh, practicing with weapons and horses, which are the stuff of which power was made of in the medieval period. In the modern period, it is culture control and media power. That's the stuff that power is made of in the modern period, and it is completely controlled by liberals. And of course, they do not concern themselves with resource production, with money making. They concern themselves with culture creation, and they lose money doing it. All of the major media lose money. Pretty soon, Hollywood is going to start losing money. Video game studios, they lose money on the bullshit games they make, but through this loss of money, they gain culture power, they gain media power, and this is how they rule. So, I'm not saying stop working, quit your job, even though I did it, right? So I can, I quit my job so I can become a more efficient cultural and political worker, right? I quit my job so I
Mhm.
could spend more time working on the white nationalist cause and organizing and activism, right? And as it happens, I can do it because I was born to some privilege, right? Uh,
Mhm.
but then again, this is the best I can personally do. And my point here is, do not venerate labor. Labor is for peasants, right? Only fools and horses work. That's a very good show, but that's also a very valid saying, because you're not. I mean, we're gonna have. I consider that people who are right now into nationalism, if we win, we become the ruling class. So we have to understand that physical labor is not our bag of baby, or shouldn't be. We should be developing the methodologies of rule, the instruments of rule. And in the modern period, like if it were the medieval period, we should be focusing on swordplay and horsemanship. Because the modern period, we should be focusing on culture control, culture creation, and
Well,
media
even in the medieval
activities.
period, some of the wealthiest people, uh, the most comfortable people, would have been in the clergy. And what were they doing? They were literate. They knew how to read. They knew how to write. They knew how to speak Latin. They knew how to create culture. And the people who had the privilege of being educated, they were also being uh, educated into literacy and reading and writing, creating culture, having knowledge, right? And knowledge is power. It always is. So it isn't even just about learning swordplay and horsemanship and things like that. I would say, the cultural aspect hasn't changed too. But this is where I'm going to push back a little bit, because I don't think work sucks. I think, a lot of it can do, and a lot of it is because of the useless, meaningless work that we are engaged in, particularly since the Industrial Revolution. I'm a
Yeah.
big Ted K appreciator. I think he gets this 100% right. He wrote the book on this, and everyone else is basically just repeating what he said in their own words. Um, a lot of the work we do are surrogate activities. They're not fulfilling. To the extent that they benefit us, it's just that we see some numbers change in our bank accounts. We get some meaningless tokens given to us, and deposited in our bank accounts. But the true beneficiary of our labor is someone else. who is often someone who doesn't even like us very much and can replace us. Whereas the work that can be done in the countryside, so going back to the whole main thing of the countryside or the urbanite, and we were talking about this earlier about the having free time to do cultural things. And then someone said, I think it was the Woodlander, that I have actually quite a lot of free time, and I think that the thing about having the free time is like if you're in an urban environment, you have the free time to do cultural things, and the cultural things will have an impact in an urban environment. Whereas if you're just sort of writing poetry for yourself on a seaside cottage, it's cultural, I suppose, it's artistic, but it's not changing any of the zeitgeist. So I just wanted to say that. But I do wanted to say that the work you do about the farm, the work you do about the homestead, it is fulfilling. Some of it can be gross, some of it can be uncomfortable, some of it can be literally backbreaking, some of it can be dangerous, but a lot of it is also fulfilling, and it feels good, and it's you wake up and you know what you have to do, and you go and you do it, and then it's done, and you feel good. And some of the work, so even the physical work, it's very I would say it's very fulfilling, and I enjoyed it. And one of the things I love to do the most is chopping firewood, going to the forest, looking for firewood, bringing it back, chopping up logs. The old saying, "He who chops the wood warms himself twice." It's I don't know. I just enjoyed that a lot. It's very satisfying because I get to be in the woods too, and then I get to chop the firewood and make a nice roaring fire, and it feels good. Everyone's enjoying it. So I would say that, yeah, work can suck, but it depends on the work you're doing. And then also the medieval peasants, depending on like which century of the medieval area and which country in the medieval area you're talking about, medieval peasants had a lot more free time than we did. They had a lot more festivals. They worked fewer weeks than we do today. And I think we often fall into this trap that we've been taught to believe through, I don't know, various Hollywood films or subversive academic types that want us to believe that up until very recently, Steven Pinker types, I guess, that up until very recently life was just miserable and dirty, and our ancestors were all unintelligent buffoons covered in grime. So I just wanted to, like I said, this is kind of a bit of a semi-formal debate as well. Hwitgeard, what do you think about all that?
I'm very much in agreement with you. I am very much an appreciator of the value of good work and good labour, and not feeling it's something that should be below us. I also think that a lot of rather than praising the free time and leisure of the medieval monks and what they created, it's important to acknowledge the fact that a lot of artisans, stonemasons, were regular peasants and regular people. Probably not as like low down as normal peasants, but still they weren't part of the clergy class. A lot of those who were building beautiful early medieval churches, they were regular people as well. But I think also I very much appreciate those meaningful jobs. I think part of the problem of the modern world is the fact that a lot of our jobs are essentially worthless. They it's not just that they feel soulless; it's that they literally mean nothing. They rest on a whole backbone of nonsense, like a Ponzi scheme of something. It just seems to sit on nowhere. But as something more practical, something more wedged into reality, like um, like people who build things, like people who log trees, like people who farm, and that's the thing. But a lot of peasants, they wouldn't have had farming as their main job. Everyone was a farmer because everyone lived off their land. You would have been a farmer to grow your own crops and attend to that. But also, these people um, would have been specialists in some other work. They would have been both farmers and stonemasons. They would have been farmers and people who worked with medicine. There'd have been farmers and people who, who just did any other job. It
Yeah,
shouldn't
and
be.
they would have had I'm talking about memes. I made a meme about how, the medieval peasant in, 15th century England, he worked less than 20 weeks of the year, and he had a specialist job that made him feel important in the community, and he also grew his own food and his own community's food, and had access to it, and it was way healthier than much of the goy slop that we're eating nowadays. And I contrasted that with, the Doge dog, the weak little dog meme, and it's modern millennial. I live in a tiny little studio apartment, and I have a basil plant on the windowsill. And so, and it's true that in a smaller town, I even see this in the town. I experienced this even in the town I live in Spain in modern times, but this was certainly true even more so in the past. That people, the men and women, mostly men, right, that had a specific job, the local tanner, the local butcher, the local carpenter. That job, humble as it may be, gave him a sense of pride and a sense of purpose. And if he did his job really well, and if he did it better than the carpenters in the other villages, even more sense of pride came from his work. And he could walk around town with his chin held up high because I'm the carpenter. And people know me for my good work, my good carpentry. Or I'm the butcher, and people come to me for sustenance. And I've even experienced this just living in a small town in Spain in current year. Of course, I stand out because I'm a foreigner. All right, I'm not Spanish, but also the job I did. I was the English teacher, right? And it was a very good way to meet lots of people. Obviously, you meet the parents of all your students, and then walking down the streets, I would see my students in the street. I would see their parents. I would see their friends. And then word gets around about who you are, and it's the English teacher. It's the profe, right? The profesor. And people would wave and say hi, and I would hear "Hola, profe" as I'm walking down the streets, and it feels nice. You have a job that has given you some, for lack of a better term, renown, I guess. Not in a sort of grandiose way, but people know you for what you do and for doing it well. And that makes you feel a lot better than just being another anonymous drone doing a 9 to 5, sat at a cubicle somewhere for some multinational corporation, and you're filing out meaningless TPS reports like in the film Office Space. So I think that is also another one of the impulses, the natural impulses that people are feeling when they have this urge to quit the cities, which is happening a lot. Apparently, even I saw this in Germany, that some politician, I guess it's been happening enough in Germany, people quitting the cities and moving to the countryside, or starting farms or something, that some politician in Germany was compelled to say that people who are leaving the cities in Germany are all far right, Nazis. Because of course, right? What are they leaving the cities for? Well, the reasons we've been talking about for the past hour or so. Yeah, so I don't know if we should get into now. I suppose the best segue would be to continue with this theme and start talking about the authentic versus the inauthentic, because this is something that we've been talking about for a few days as well amongst the three of us, and other people have been talking about this throughout the community, especially in the wake of this explosion of AI technology, chat GPT, AI art, deep fakes, clips of Joe Rogan saying something with his voice and his tone of voice is clearly his voice, but he's saying words that he never actually said. It's all very funny, but it also has some massive repercussions. It implies very big things here. So I suppose the best segue is to continue talking about this authentic versus inauthentic. And I know, Nix, you've got some, again, some very thought-provoking takes on this. So I'll throw it to you.
This makes me think that basically you organized this so that I will be the party pooper instead of you for one stream. I can see right through you, Profe.
Yes,
I can
it does seem that
right through your evil plan.
this has been a nice the turntables, as it were. Of all the times that I've come onto your show, the Writer's Block, to be the party pooper, now I am giving you the privilege.
Right. Well, yeah. So basically, when we were, I was reading something that the Woodlander posted. He said that I don't know if someone can find the original post or the Woodlander. I know he's in chat. He could reproduce it. But it was about how the battle of the future is going to be the quest for authenticity or something like that.
Yeah, I think he said something like in the first, in the next 10 years, we'll see the biggest rise in the people desiring authenticity or something like that.
This is also an issue that on Millennial that Distributist was discussing as well, and he seemed to flesh out this distinction in a bit of detail. So it might be that Woodlander was picking up on this particular issue after that, and then flesh it out even more. So I think I've also got its roots there.
Yeah, well, the Woodlander will, and he's in chat. He can let us know where this came from, and like many times, I got hung up on that term, authenticity. So maybe this is the lawyer in me, right? But when someone says authenticity, it implies a process of authentication, right? And this that makes it a question of ascertaining identity. So let me just so the Woodlander says the coming decades will be a search for authenticity. And let me just see if I can find what I wrote at the time in our private conversations, right? Because I really liked what I wrote there. So yeah, here it is. Authenticity is overrated. um, so the question was, of course, when we say authenticity, right? We are discussing, we are implying that there is a process of authentication, which will ascertain which is authentic and which is inauthentic, and in a sense, which is something, which is what it presents itself to be, and which is something that is not what it presents itself to be. Which brings us to the problem of identity. And in my experience, right, of ascertaining identity, ascertaining whether something is what it claims, or what it is claimed to be, we have three methodologies by which we can ascertain it. The first is revelation, right? It is revealed to us by an authority that it is what it is. So, for example, if I wanted to ascertain someone's identity, I would ask for their government provided ID, government issued ID. And since the government issued ID is presumed to be true, I can be, to a certain degree, certain that this person is who they claim to be. And legally speaking, I have covered my ass because I have no reason to believe that someone is running around carrying false government ID. The second reason is the second way is we call it I call it mafia identity verification. Well, how do I know that Pox is who he claims to be? Well, because someone whom I already trust, let's say Hwitgeard, told me that, yeah, actually, Pox is who he claims to be, and I will reinforce the truthfulness of this claim by putting my skin in the game. I will quote unquote vouch for him. This is how mafia guys ascertain a stranger's if identity, that he is in the game and that he's friendly and that he can be trusted. Someone they already trust vouches for them. And it's very organic. It's very we call it mafia, but it predates all of these types of organizations. It's basically how human beings have ascertained identity before the rise of government ID. You know a guy who knows a guy, and the guy you trust implicitly, and he trusts the other guy implicitly. Therefore, there is a link of trust reaching from you to the other guy, and it can span the whole planet through 6 degrees of separation. And so, yeah, that's how I know that Kevin Bacon is my nigga. Right, and the third way is to actually witness the whole thing where someone's identity is created. So we know about how Judaism is matrilineal. Your mother has to have been Jewish for you to be considered Jewish. Why? Because, well, we can witness you popping out of your mama's vagina. And if you popped out of her, we can be reasonably certain that you are her son and you are her blood relative. And therefore, if she was Jewish, then you're Jewish too. And as for the father, well, better not ask questions there. You can never be certain, but you can actually be 100% certain that someone is some woman's son or daughter. So my question is, right, having said all of that, the search for authenticity, what identity, true or false, are we questing for when we search for this authenticity? So there is a true, and in the context of the Woodlander, it's again this implication that the countryside or the woods are more authentic than the city. And my two questions are, A, how do you know this? Because for me and my friend who has trouble falling asleep in a small town, the city where we grew up is the most authentic thing we can experience. Like in the city of Skopje, especially in the downtown area where I grew up, every street corner has a memory for me. And this is not something that can be replicated. I cannot just tell you how it happened. I directly and empirically verify this, right? Experience this as my hometown. And this is deeply authentic for me. That's the first thing. The second thing is, sure, it's authentic, but is it good, right? Because ultimately, I appreciate the value of authentic over inauthentic. I understand the value, but is it always the case? And fundamentally, if something is deemed inauthentic, but we can use it to further the white nationalist cause, do we drop it because it's quote unquote inauthentic? Or do we prioritize the cause over whatever we have considered authentic? So it's not really so much of it's an objection. Maybe I'm just objecting to the term, but when we are talking authentic or inauthentic, we are talking about identity. We are talking about authentication, and we are. I guess I'm trying to. I guess I've made myself. I guess I've made.
I know. I sense that Hwitgeard is ready to jump in, so I'll throw it to him.
Okay. Well, there's 2 points to make here. I think that initially, I think Nick Nix's definition of authentic could very much be a synonym for verisimilitude. There's
Mhm.
a kind of a truthful reality that underlies a lot of the social fictions that we seem to have in the modern world. A lot of the fictions tend to be very, for want of a better phrase, social constructs. They are very much sort of social fictions that we all agree to, rather than being real, tangible entities in the real world. And a lot of that is created through mass technology and also living in the modern urban world. So I would tend to agree to these sort of fictions that are placed on us. And living in an urban environment can very much create more social fictions that we'll agree to that wouldn't be in a state of nature. And I'm not
Mhm.
using state of nature in a sort of Rousseauian way, but I mean like things which will be a lot more universally true regardless of the social circumstances you're in. Like there's a kind of social veil that sits on top of the underlying fundamental reality that we live in, and a lot of those social fictions will very much be things that people will agree to and work around, but really have no. It has no uh, um, verisimilitude. It has no real underlying truth behind it. So I think in terms of authenticity, what we demand or what we desire tends to be we can see that there's a kind of a falseness in the world we're living in,
Mhm.
and when it comes to authenticity, we want um, even if it can be quite bad for us, or it can be something that we don't necessarily want, like a lot of physical labor, a lot of physical work is what we need, even if it's not what we want. So I think there's a lot more authenticity to the engagement of physical labor, even if it's not what we necessarily want to do. It's still what was it with in fact, yes, it was in your talk with Snurkle. See, I'm umlaut in the O, Snurkle. Um, about it's not what we evolved. Um,
It's not what we evolved to
oh,
do, it's what we evolved doing.
yes, that's the one. And that what we evolved doing very much gives a much more concrete contextual background for what we ought to be doing as well. It's something that's within our natures, something that's within what our bodies are built for and what they're made for. So there's that kind of those sort of things can kind of lead us to authenticity. It's what a, a kind of a natural obligation rather than desire. Um, and it's like it's reaching further into those much more fixed and very true roots. I can just a comment by Emily Anna Walt in the chat that talks about authenticity is like being transgender. It doesn't really exist. But I would say that um, in the terms that I've just been using here, I would say that authenticity is very much referring to the opposite of that. It'd be referring to much more fixed and concrete entities that are below or outside of social conventions. But another issue relating to what Nick was just talking about is clearly the issue of AI, and AI is very much a inauthentic thing. But when Nick was talking about how what should our focus be? Should it be on what's good for us in terms of our racial survival, or in terms of the nationalist movement? In which case, AI would provide a useful tool in that sense. So, how useful can the term authenticity be in this sense when what is more authentic for us is the survival of our people. But in order to do that, we have to go through non-authentic means. So it kind of ties us in knots into these very unnatural and inauthentic routes in order to obtain authenticity.
Yeah, I
I would
think
disagree. I don't think that AI art is necessarily inauthentic. I think that like one of my favorite channels on Telegram and we frequently collaborate. He makes a lot of the thumbnails for my shows. He's made some thumbnails for Fox. It's Atlas AI art. And it's right in the name that he basically trains robots to make quote unquote AI art. So in a sense, his product is authentic AI art. It because authenticity means basically, the way I understand it, being what you claim to be, right? So when I say I am a white man, I'm a white nationalist, I'm being authentic. Insofar as I want to create white ethno-states, right? I want these societies, I'm being truthful. We can say, for example, that a liberal is inauthentic because they say they want, oh, I want a multicultural society, I want this or that, but in reality, they live in a lily white suburb with one token Asian family, right? This is an inauthentic kind of person, right? So, if the artistic product has AI art stamped and it says this was made by robots, right? Nobody's trying to deceive me that a human artist painted this, or like if a deep fake is obviously a fake. So I'm thinking here about some regulation with regard to obviously fake money, right? So in the United States, you're allowed, for example, to print dollar bills with your own face because nobody in their right mind is going to believe this is real money, so you will not be charged for using counterfeit, which is to say inauthentic money, right? So basically a dollar bill with my face on it does not present itself as American legal tender, therefore it is authentic because it does not lie to you. And so I would apply this to in a sense I am a deep enemy of inauthentic ideologies. So I think that the biggest threat we are facing as a movement comes from the center right, the alt-right, all of these really inauthentic people who want through winks and nods to get white nationalists and other racial identitarians to support basically current thing Republicans and really get you onto the based brown grift or whatever, distract you with all of these ancillary issues. So I guess I guess what the Woodlander was going for was not was what would have probably been better described as natural. However, if you say natural and not authentic, you open yourself up to accusations that you're committing the naturalistic fallacy, and that's always, I guess, um, problematic. Although, I would be defending the naturalistic position in certain aspects. In other aspects, I would be against
Yeah.
it. But that's really my question when we're talking about whether is something authentic or not. We are asking the question: is this thing the thing it is claiming or it is claimed to be? If you put a big stamp, this is AI art, I don't consider it inauthentic. Is it problematic in other ways? Sure, we can debate that, but authenticity is not the issue in most cases.
Yeah, I can see that. I think that my concern is that there seems to be a disjunct between the objective and the subjective of what a thing is. Of if the claim of what's authentic is this what it claims to be, then that can have a multitude of different meanings. Whereas a much more a, objective stance would be: is this well? Is this what it is, rather than is this what it claims to be? But again, that's a quite a long and convoluted issue into just tying yourself in knots. But I think that distinction is important in some ways.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of almost like pill pull here. And I think also we are looking at this question like autists instead of like artists. And I think there's a lot of art to the question, to the statement rather, that the Woodlander made that some time ago. The coming decades will be a search for authenticity. It's almost, to my mind or to my soul, it is a part of the human condition. We are searching for authenticity. We are searching for, like we were talking about earlier, something fulfilling, something that gives you pride and something that gives you purpose. And I think the reason why we are going to see this in the coming decades is because of so much modern life is simulacra.
Yeah.
And especially now when we're getting to the age of deep fakes and people can be made to appear that they are saying something that they never said or doing something that they never did, we certainly can understand where this need for authenticity, for validity, for truth, for accurate representation comes from. And going back to the theme of nutrition and food, talking about does authentic mean that what I say I am, or what I claim this to be, it is? Well, so much of the food we're eating nowadays is not what it claims to be. It's not as healthy as it claims to be. And coming from these these vegan meat producers, the Beyond Meat, the 3D printed meat, all this stuff, they keep calling it meat, but it's not meat. It's not authentic meat. And so as we sink more and more into this world of lies, of misnomers, I think that's what the Woodlander is getting at when he says that there's going to be a search for authenticity. Where can I buy a burger that is actually made of beef? And where can I buy a burger that's made of beef that comes from a healthy cow that's not been injected with hormones and steroids and fed? I've seen some pretty shocking things about what some battery farm, industrial farm cows get fed. They just pretty much get, dumped a whole lot of really terrible things into the trough and just give it to the cows, right? So that's the authenticity. And I think this is why I said, we're kind of looking at it like autists and not artists. And I think there's a spiritual part to this quick question as well. I think this is behind the rise in the pagan side of the ethno-nationalist community and the rise in people turning to or being interested in paganism in broader society. I think that there's the sense of an inauthenticity in some of the religions or the traditions or the practices that have become a part of our culture. And people are searching for something that's a bit more, that resonates with them more, that makes them feel that connection to what you were saying, Hwitgeard, about natural order of things. And it's interesting, the question about art. It's like, what's to say, or who is to say that the original of a work of art is more valuable than a picture perfect carbon copy of it, right? I mean, in houses all over the world, you can see copies of Da Vinci's art, Van Gogh, Picasso, right? But they're clearly not as valuable as the original. Because why? Well, because the copy isn't authentic. Is it an authentic copy? Sure. Is it an accurate representation? Nowadays, with the scanning technology and everything, most definitely. But it's not the original. So I think even again, when we are talking about the search for authenticity, we could even use the search for the original, the source, in another way of putting it. But yeah, what Nix is saying, that sometimes authentic means shit. Sometimes authentic means suffering. We've been talking about this privately over the past few days, and I think Nix, this leads into the film The Banshees of Inisherin, which I did recently see. I think we've all three of us have seen it now. And as I was watching it, and it is a very good film. I'll probably now that I've returned to writing on my Substack, I'll probably write a review a review of this film, because it's one of those rare occasions nowadays, a film that's actually enjoyable to watch, not full of pause. Although I did catch just a little sprinkling of subversion, but not too much. It's not too bad, and it's a very good film. I really enjoyed it. And as I was watching it, I couldn't help but thinking it from time to time, I understand exactly why Nix wanted me to watch this. And I understand exactly why this film was on his mind with regards to this conversation. Because, like what we've been talking about, the authentic lifestyle in the countryside, in nature, versus the inauthentic urbanite, or people who hold that position. Although I don't think that's Woodlander's position. I don't think he's saying to live in the city is inauthentic. But in any case, the superiority perhaps of living in the countryside, it's more in connection with nature, and the urbanites are dependent on all these systems and technologies, and they're so cut off from Mother Nature and human nature. But then as you're watching The Banshees of Inisherin, there's so many parts of that film where the story gives us a glimpse of just how miserable sometimes life can be in these small towns in the countryside. And in that film, we can see characters who actually desire to go to the city because they are fed up with the country life. So I guess you could even say that this question, where you fall on this question, depends on you as a person. And we all are tempted by the notion that the grass is always greener on the other side. But anyway, I wanted to get Nix's thoughts about the film and how it relates to this question of authentic versus inauthentic.
Well, it's a film fundamentally about it. It's set in 1923 in rural Ireland on a fictional island of Inisherin. And first of all, let me tell you, it feels very authentic. Just that opening song they have with the lady singing,
And the landscapes, it's amazing.
It just resonates with my soul so deeply.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another thing I just wanted to say about when we were talking about authenticity years ago, like many years ago, 2015, which is almost 8 years ago now. I attended a lecture where this was one of these Ordo Templi Orientis people. He was with Telema, Aleister Crowley, where basically he extolled the experiential method of authenticating, and criticized the revelatory method of the church and the process-dependent method of science, right? And over time, I grew to find Telema and the whole Aleister Crowley thing a little distasteful. I'm not going to say inauthentic, although it is somewhat inauthentic as well in the sense that we're using the term now. But I think that was a very valuable insight. And ever since, I've trusted my gut much more in matters of authentication. If it resonates with my soul, I am likelier to find it true. However, I caution people to not surrender their reason. Something may feel true, but then it turns out to be false. And a lot of manipulation, a lot of lies, a lot of propaganda meant to mind fuck you, right? Not to deceive, but to mind fuck you, is really revolves around that difference between things that feel right but aren't right, that gray space of things that feel right but aren't right. So, anyways, and my experience of this film is, and people are gonna watch it, so no spoilers, but it is fundamentally uh, about a conflict which arises between two men, because one of the men wants things to remain as they are, and the other finds that notion of things remaining as they are unbearable, to the point where he's willing to inflict on his friend, on himself, and on the entire community unspeakable pain and damage, right? And I'm watching this film and I'm thinking, I'm in this strange position here because I'm part of a movement which is nationalist and conservative and will likely side with the guy who wants things to remain as they are. So that's Padraig. But I identify most in this film with the guy who desperately needs things to change. That is Calm, right? And
Hmm.
fundamentally, right, people would really need to have seen this film to understand the conflict. But Calm is an artist, Padraig is a farmer, right? Well, Calm is a musician, right? And he can feel the time of his life elapsing. He is older than Padraig, and he feels that the life he lives on this small Irish island is going nowhere, that he is not going to leave his mark on the world, and that in order to do so, he needs to radically change his life, maybe change of venue, maybe change his lifestyle. And to Padraig's chagrin, I don't know how to pronounce that, um, Calm feels the need to change his friend circle.
Hmm.
And without revealing a lot more, because just the way that the conflict between these two men escalates to a ridiculous degree, it forms much of the film's drama. I don't want to take that away from anyone who hasn't seen the film, but it is very
It's not
interesting.
even
It
the
puts
just the
you it
conflict
puts
too.
you in
It's
this.
there's other parts of the film where you're seeing, even the character of the sister, the daily life of the people in this island town. You know, it's very interesting because on the one hand, especially in that opening sequence, it seems idyllic, and I think many people uh, who have that urge to live in the countryside, who want to live on in a cottage on the seaside, will feel that urge very much swelling in them. And then there's other parts of the film, like I was talking about earlier, how it's a question of mentality. You might want to live in the cottage on the seaside, or in a small town, but um, you might not have the mentality for it, because this film, in an exaggerated way in some cases, but and in ways that benefit the story, that shape the narrative, push the narrative along. But there's some moments in the film where you get to see, there's not even much dialogue, but there are some scenes with dialogue too, but you get to see just kind of how miserable it can be sometimes, and how boring and a bit gloomy it can be. Um, and I can certainly attest to that. I remember one time in my traveling days when I was kind of wandering around, and I was working on this with this elderly couple on their farm in the middle of nowhere in the French countryside. And the first week I arrived, it was just piss poor rain, muddy. It was just me and this elderly couple. There was no one else. I was just helping them out, and in exchange they gave me a place to stay for a few weeks, because that's what I was doing. I was just backpacking around France, and I'll tell you, during that week of rainy, gray weather and being the only person there, it can be a bit gloomy. You can feel a bit lonely. I think loneliness is a big theme in this film. And I thought it was very, very interesting to see that juxtaposition. Hwitgeard, what were your thoughts on this film and as it relates to this this issue of, the correct or the most fulfilling lifestyle for us today?
Well, I think it's more important to put the film in its context. It's set during the Irish Civil War. The two characters represent the two sides of Republican Ireland and Northern Ireland. That one day they suddenly decide to split and stop being friends. And obviously, Padre is much more he doesn't know why they've split. I guess he represents the much more royalist Northern Ireland, whereas Colm is the Republic, and the Republic wants to go its own way. It wants to pursue its own glories. It wants to be. It wants to have the musical pursuits that Colm has, and Padraig doesn't seem to understand as to why they're arguing, why they've fallen out, and that's the whole crux of this film. But they are a unified nation. They are a unified people, but they've split over this seemingly meaningless to them political.
Well, the Irish Civil War wasn't between Ulster and Ireland. It was between the Irish Free State and the anti-treaty IRA. It was really between Michael Collins and Eamon de Valera. So it's Irish on Irish, not Northern Irish on Irish, which I guess underscores the futility, because it was really an unnecessary conflict, if you're asking me.
I'm just referring to it as Northern Ireland just because I'm English, so it's what we refer to the Republic and non-Republic.
No, it's they're all Republicans in the Irish Civil War, and they're fighting over the Republic of Ireland, except Eamon de Valera was against the treaty.
There's the difference between the Troubles and the Civil War. So the Civil War, Nix is right. In the 1920s, there was still another great film about this, actually, again with zero pause, but it was made before films just went terrible. The Wind That Shakes the Barley is very good about this. It was Irish fighting Irish in mainland Ireland. It had nothing to do with the North yet, because they were, like Nick said, there was the split between people of Eamon de Valera's persuasion versus Michael Collins' followers. The one side of after basically they had shrugged off a bit of the British yoke, some of the Irish freedom fighters kind of went all red, and some of them went very radical, and that provoked some infighting, and then you ended up having this civil war with brothers fighting brothers. Comrades who were on the same side months ago were now firing bullets at each other. It was very much just a terrible twist of fate. Sorry, Nick, I had to butt in there.
Right, but so in a sense, right? Maybe I'm just too sympathetic to the Irish Free State and Michael Collins there, but the conflict between Calum and Padraig in the film actually does have meaning. There is actual disagreement, whereas the Irish Civil War, and I don't want to detract from people's sacrifices in that thing, but I see very little sense, of very little disagreement, and this is maybe my revisionist history for the show. I think it was fundamentally because Eamon de Valera had a very big ego and could not stand to see himself upstaged by Michael Collins. But that is my position on it.
Hwitgeard?
Oh yeah. In that case, my mistake for getting those two events confused. But I did some research on the film when I watched it to look into the themes behind it, and it did seem like it was intentionally built on the Irish Civil War in this case. But the two of them represent a unified whole as Ireland, but they seem to be disagreeing on which direction they should be going in. One seems to be pursuing lofty heights of what he wants to achieve. He wants to be, uh, he he wants to be world renowned for his music. He wants to be known, but the other one just wants the simple life. He just wants to go to the pub and have a beer, and doesn't have any wider dreams than that. But also is the theme, interestingly, of authenticity. Um, uh, it, Colm seems to hate the fact that everyone in there seems to be wearing a social mask. You see these masks represented in Colm's house hanging from the ceiling. But these sort of social masks are how people in this community tend to behave. They seem to present themselves with this kind of fictional depiction of themselves. And it seems that Colm only seems to actually like Padraig when he gets drunk in the pub and stands up for himself, gets very angry and tells Colm what he thinks. And that's the first time that Colm actually realizes that maybe he's made a mistake, that he actually likes Padraig again because he's being honest. And then obviously, you know what happens in the film and how the plot unfolds. But it seems that when Padraig reveals that he sent that other musician to go back, telling him that his father or mother was ill, but he sends the musician whom Colm had made friends with, just because he's getting quite jealous of him stepping in, and that kind of deception seems to drive Colm to his last tether of anger. So there's this theme of authenticity, but also the theme of a united nation and different directions that they're pulling each other in.
Yeah, I think the metaphor of the Irish conflict is referenced, is alluded to on several occasions. There's a scene where they look across the water to the mainland, and they can see smoke rising, and they can hear bombs exploding. And there's even a juxtaposition where, you know, everyone is asking Pádraig and Colm, are you rowing? What are you rowing about? And they answer, I don't think we're rowing. And then in a later scene in the pub, some publicans are talking about the Civil War back on the mainland, and they're asking, what are they fighting over? You know, and they don't really know. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of metaphor and allusion there. I was also struck by the character Colm as well. I really related to him, and my heart went out for him too, because I just wanted to tell him, like, Colm, you know, you could leave the island, you could surround yourself with different people, you could change your friend circle or whatever you want. You could go to the big city on the mainland, but you'd still have those questions gnawing at you. You'd still have that anxiety gnawing at you, because it's part of you. It's part of all of us. It's, you know, especially people with that sort of temperament, that artist temperament, with a desire to leave a mark, to be remembered. You know, some people, that isn't very important for them. You know, they're quite content with what they have in life, and with their friends and their family, and, you know, the work they do, and the hobbies they have, and that's great, and it's wonderful that people like that exist. But then you have types like like Calm, who wants to leave a mark. He wants to do something something grand with his life, and he can feel that he's got very few years remaining, so he wants to do something. And that sensation can be with you no matter where you go. And I'll say, as someone who has moved around and has lived in different places and has had, who feels these desires, you can live in the big city and you'll find, like we were talking about earlier, about the grass being always greener. If you live in the city and you still have this gnawing feeling, oh, I can't stand the people here, and I can't concentrate on my work, on my art. It's too noisy. So I'm going to go to a cottage on the seaside. So you go to the cottage on the seaside, and now life is comparatively a lot more boring. Colm even uses the word dull to describe his friend. The people are a bit dull. They're certainly not as stimulated as people in the city. They don't have as much to talk about as people in the city. They're not as cultivated. They're not as cultured as people in the city. Okay, so now you're bored with the people. And so now you're not getting enough stimulation from your social group. So you're back to hating the people that you're surrounded by. Well, that's because you have to work on the things that are in you, and you have to adapt to your surroundings and look for the best in the people you're surrounded with, which can be increasingly difficult nowadays. So I really did relate to that character and how he's dealing with those emotions and those desires and that want to make something, that want to maybe even get away, although he doesn't quite want to get away as much as the sister, Porik's sister. And I'm going to ban you, Emily Anawalt. You've been flooding the chat with ridiculous comments and quite insulting ones for some reason too. And also, you're just wrong that the word authentic is a political term, or it is some sort of astroturfed term, psyop term being imposed upon us. No, we are having a genuine conversation about the importance of authenticity, because a friend of ours made a very good statement about it that prompted a desire to have a discussion. I'm sorry that upsets you so much, but my patience with you has run out, so you are now blocked. Goodbye. Okay, sorry about that. Nix or Hwitgeard, take it away.
I'll leave that to Nix.
Well, recently I got very, very, very stinking drunk, like rolling on the floor drunk. And my mother asked me, "Why are you so unhappy?" Because I guess I am unhappy. You got all of these things going for you, and I do. And I thought to myself, well, she's right. I am unhappy, but I have all of these things going for me. The reality is, there is a small minority of people on this planet who are never going to be happy with what they achieve, with what they do, because they're trying to fill a deep yearning, a quest maybe not for authenticity, but for something which is unclear even to them what it is, with sometimes it's things, sometimes it's achievement, sometimes it's drugs and alcohol, sex, gambling. It can go bad very fast. But even if you can keep these influences at bay, you're still going to feel empty. You're still going to feel unaccomplished and unhappy. And I think Calm is one of those people. I think I am one of these people. And it's definitely not a normal existence. It's definitely not something most people are cut out for. But then again, like, we are not just nationalists, we are also dissidents from the egalitarian position. Not all men are created equal, and this implies not only a hierarchy of good, of better and worse men, right? And I really hate it when people reduce inegalitarianism to basically, oh, here's this one parameter by which we will judge you. No, we human beings have multiple characteristics, multiple parameters by which we have specificity as opposed to other human beings, from specificity from other human beings. And I guess this sort of drive, this sort of mixed blessing, that, or you could call it a curse, that you're never really happy with what you have and what you have accomplished. There's an emptiness at the center of your being, which you're trying to fill with things, with people, with achievements, with hedonism, right? Um, it's a mode of existing which is going to be always and forever alien to the vast majority of people, but it allows a small minority to attempt impossible things because they wrongly believe it will bring them happiness, which is, I guess, why I'm a white nationalist, why I have elected to fight against the Nuremberg moral paradigm, to fight against white dispossession in a world where the enemy has a 70-year head start. And it's literally illegal to hold these opinions, or at least express them, on a majority of the European continent. And it's definitely discouraged on the North American continent. Uh, and I wrote an article. Woodlander says I wouldn't say specificity when shit faced. You're wrong there, Woodlander. When I'm shit faced, I'm like autistically grandiloquent. When I'm sober, everything gets run through a comprehensibility filter, so that so that I don't sound like a fucking robot. No, no, actually,
we'll have to do a drunken stream next time. That'll be fun.
that would probably be a bad idea. I need to
Yeah.
get drinking
Odyssey
under control.
exclusive, I guess.
And okay, I wrote an article like a long time ago. It's called "Fractious Villages, Oily Cities," and I'm riffing off of a tweet of Nassim Nicholas Taleb, where let me just find exactly what the man said
I remember
there.
this. Yeah, this
Yeah,
was
basically,
go on.
what he says is, when you see from the outside a quaint village with a seemingly idyllic life, consider that the locals are preoccupied with local intrigues, split into fractious alliances, and entangled into petty disputes. Rural life lacks the oil of commerce that makes cities harmonious. And this is deeply counterintuitive, right? Because we see that cities are full of strife, but no, you like Whittier says, when you are within the rural context, within the context of village life, because everyone you already know everyone you meet, and you know them deeply, and you could say almost intimately, um,
Mhm.
in order to attain to keep the peace, in order to keep everyone from killing each other, you have to sometimes wear this false face. You have to, and this is something that Calm in the film finds distasteful, and this is why he gains a lot of respect for Padraig after Padraig has the drunken outburst, where he basically drops the false face and gives Calm a piece of his mind, because that's what Calm would prefer honesty, being surrounded by people who wear their true faces. When you live in a big city, because most of the transactions are with the currency of coin, right, with money, and not with the currency of personal reputation. Because even in a village, even if you buy something for money, the ultimate currency is personal reputation. In the city, you are ironically free to wear your real face. Nobody cares if you are a prick to them, or if you're honest. Like, I'm known to be a quote unquote controversial nationalist guy, right, in Macedonia. Yet When I go to business, I regularly shop at a business with a Muslim owner because, let's face it, he's the best at what he does. He knows who I am, but he still does business with me because I'm a regular customer. I've been a regular customer for the past 10 years, right? And it gives us both a freedom which we would not have in a smaller town. In a smaller town, we would be feuding, and the feud would be a matter of honor. And you can see this basically, we're a very small community of Telegram nationalists, right? And everyone's feuding with everyone else because it's everyone honor at stake. Because the currency of the realm is face and honor and reputation and not money. So there's a lot more disconnect. And that's what I wrote. And again, for a lot of people living in a world where the currency is honor and face and reputation, would be preferable to living in a big city. I can accept that. I understand that. And people actually do gain quite a bit of meaning, like Padraig in the film, from being nice, from being good to their neighbors, from playing their social role, which necessarily involves subjugating their true self to the social role. So when I was working as an attorney, I assumed the social role of an attorney, which meant I did a lot of subjugation of my actual personality to that social role. As people may know, I'm a bit of a conflicted, a contentious person who enjoys a good scrap. And that's advantageous if you're a litigator when you're dealing with the other guys, right? But it's strongly disadvantageous when you're dealing with clients, especially if they like feeling in charge and gain confidence from bossing you around. You actually have to take on a submissive role sometimes as an attorney. And that really went against my personality type, but I did it because I assumed that social role. But the beauty of the oil of commerce, as Taleb puts it, that when my 8 hours were up, I could take that face off, I could take that mask off and become what I ought to be, what I really am, which is very different from the face I presented to my clients, to the judges, to people in various institutions. I remember the first time when I was writing an email to a client and Mrs. Jeelvy saw my work face for the real time. She was unnerved by the transformation because as I was writing the email, I had assumed the social role of very stern attorney admonishing a client who had done a stupid thing, and that's really the thing. I'm not saying, I'm saying is different people are going to have different personalities, and sometimes living village life means assuming a degree of unfreedom, social unfreedom, which in the city you're going to have a greater degree of freedom. So we have to take that into account when building a coalition. Ultimately, everything I say, and this is like maybe my superscript to everything I've said on this stream, I raise all of these questions because my ultimate goal is to forge a political coalition which will implement the agenda of white nationalism. For this, we're going to need urban people, we're going to need rural people, we're going to need pro-social people, we're going to need people who know how to be loners, people who know how to be alone in the woods, alone in the city, and forge alliances with people in the woods and in the city or in the countryside. Everything, and I got to ask these questions because I don't see anyone else asking them.
Right. It's just all memes. It's just all memes. It's all pretty shallow. Exactly. Right. Very, very well said. Sums up exactly why I wanted to bring you clever lads on for this conversation. Hwitgeard, I can see you're ready to jump in.
Yeah. Well, I can very much agree with Nick's point there. I think that there's, on the one hand, I can see the appeal of why that anonymity and why like having to be yourself is a lot more appealing in an urban environment. But at the same time, we also want to have the currency of our status, and ideally, we would like to live in much more smaller urban spaces than we currently do. I think it's important to stress. It's useful to stress the importance that this is very much a temporary transition period of essentially we're like temporarily embarrassed urbanites, but this sort of this behaviour towards people in the in urban spaces compared to how you'd be in smaller villages or in rural environments isn't going to be the long-term thing. We will eventually have to go back to putting a value and importance on a public face and manner and whatnot. But yeah, I do think that there's a usefulness for what Nix has said. However, I think it's also important to know the time scale of it not being a permanent thing either.
Okay, we're coming up to 2.5 hours. I don't want to take up more of your time. It's been a very active chat, both on YouTube and pretty active on Odyssey as well. So I put up the link to the entropy because I've seen, especially on YouTube, lots of questions have been posed throughout the chat, throughout the night. Now, if you would like to have any questions addressed by my guests or even myself, the link for the super chats is there displayed on the screen. If you feel like we've pretty much covered everything, including the questions that were on your mind, then I think a good 2.5 hours is the perfect time for the perfect duration of a live stream. So we can wrap it up pretty soon. Yeah, I think this was a very good conversation. I'm glad we had it. It's one that I think will come up again elsewhere, and perhaps even in this space again, because we are ultimately getting to fundamental issues. I mean, the question of authenticity, I think, is by definition a question of fundamental importance, and also I think this is an issue that affects people's real life, and people are making real life decisions about maybe I should relocate. Maybe this city is getting a bit too dangerous. Maybe I do feel like an alien in the place where I grew up. Maybe I would like a change of scenery. Is that a good move? Do I have the right mentality, the right personality for it? What can I expect? And I'm all about practicalities and things that we can actually implement and do in real life. And so before taking decisions, it's good to have these things in mind. It's good to hash things out. So let me just check and see if anyone has sent in some questions to the super chat. Okay. So final thoughts from you, Hwitgeard, and then Nix, your final thoughts, and then we'll close it out.
Okay. Well, I think summarising some of the points we've discussed tonight, I think it's very important that we know the limits of what we're doing. We also need to be able to look towards different areas and different walks of life as forming part of a whole. We can't just expect everyone to all just to drop what they're doing and move out to be off grid. We need to have different people doing different roles, all working together towards a common cause. And often those things will overlap, and sometimes they won't. But as long as they're moving in the same direction, that's going to be a good for us. I think that in the pursuit of authenticity, we need to be able to have a very firm footing on things. We need to, because it's proven tonight that the word itself can be very nebulous. But I think also we're moving towards a future that's going to be lost in a sea of information, and a lot of that information is going to be used against us as a political weapon. And for that, it's never been more important to seek out that very firm footing in the authentic, to ground
Sure.
ourselves as much as
Our
possible.
identities too. Our identities. Look how frequent now is asked. What does it mean to be English? Who even are the French? What does it mean to be Swedish? Our very being is being questioned. So of
Yeah,
course, having firm footing on reality, truth, authenticity, whatever word you want to use, is of great importance.
exactly, and that's more so the importance of being able to tip over such sacred cows. A lot of us, as Frothy has said, live in a very nationalist Narnia. We have these wonderful pipe dreams of how we should be living, or how we think that everyone should be living. But at the same time, we also need to deal with the concrete situation in where we are. We need to find urban solutions as much as we need to find rural solutions and moving off grid. And for those who do want to move off grid, they also need to be able to establish strong communities that can still work against the system rather than just seeking to run away. It needs to form alternative systems to the one which is against us. So we need to still have that firm foot in reality. We need to know what we're for, not just for what we're against, and move in that common direction.
Absolutely. Nix, you have the floor.
Well, I guess the theme from the entire show is what I can say is do not be fooled by your. I mean, trust your feelings, trust your gut, but do not trust it completely. I Something we need to realize. All of us, none of us were born nationalists, and none of us were initially nationalist. Everyone came from another ideology. Why? Because, well, let's face it, nationalism is not something you get taught either by your parents or by your school. It's a persecuted and hated ideology in the modern world. For this reason, we carry from our former ideologies some unexamined priors. Some of these priors, they are valid, maybe they're universal, right? These preconceptions, these postulates. Others are false. And we should especially be careful with the priors we carry over from libertarianism and conservatism, because these are specifically, I call them, they are purple pills, right? They are ideologies which do a lot more damage to the nationalist cause than, for example, just classic libtardism or progressivism or socialism, because fundamentally conservatism, at least, we know for certain, was cooked up by the enemy to misdirect nationalist energies.
Hmm.
We actually have the papers on this. I'm certain that libertarianism has an element of this as well, or that it
Mm.
was essentially built up as an ideology for autistic white guys who would have otherwise become nationalists or fascist, you know. So you gotta or check your priors. You have to, every position you take, especially ones which are taken up emotionally. I'm not saying don't take positions for emotional reasons. A lot of my positions are for emotional reasons, right? Fundamentally, nationalism is an emotion, right? It's an
Mm.
ideology, but it's also an emotion.
Mhm.
It's an extension of love and affection which one has for one's family, brought to its second broadest possible extent, that is the nation. The broadest possible extent is the race. So yeah, that's really my position. Do not allow to be misguided by your unexamined priors. Sure, it feels good, but is it good for nationalism? Is it good for the cause? Is it essential to the cause? Maybe it's good, but it's not essential, and it brings us something, but it costs us more, or it costs us something unique. So, yeah, that's my message. Then do not fall into this trap of thinking we share a cause or even an aesthetic with the conservatives and libertarians. Fundamentally, they want something very different out of life than we do.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much, guys, for joining me for this other edition of Pox Populi and Friends. You've both been great, as always. Thank you, chat, for hanging out with us and for being active, both on YouTube and Odyssey. Thank you all, everyone who tuned in. Thanks for the modding done by the great Reed Johnson for the while that he was able to hang out with us and mod the chat and provide links and promote posts and things like that. Always appreciated. So yeah, I'm very happy with this. I think it went well. Hope you all enjoyed it as well. And that'll be it for tonight. So take care, everyone. Bye bye.